At some point last night, something moved through your garden. Not past it, through it, slowly, deliberately, like it knew every inch of the place. You were asleep. The lights were off. The garden, you know, the one with the feeder and the flower pots and the patio chairs, had become something else entirely, and the creatures moving through it weren't visiting. They were home. Most people picture their garden at night as a quieter version of the daytime. The same space, just darker, just emptier, waiting for morning. It isn't. The moment you go inside, the real activity begins. And what's out there, right now, in your garden, on your lawn, under your shed, is stranger and more alive than most people ever find out. Tonight, we're going into the dark. We're going through exactly what takes over a typical British garden between dusk and dawn, why it's there, and what it means that you've been sharing your space with it all this time without knowing. Stay with this until the end, because the last thing we cover happens every single night, and it's something most garden owners never even think to wonder about. Britain's gardens cover around 400,000 hectares of land. That's more than all of our national nature reserves combined, more than the Peak District, more than the Lake District and the Norfolk Broads put together. Most of that land goes completely unwatched for 8 hours every night, which means that for a third of every day, the wildlife that shares this country with us has the run of some of the most food-rich, shelter-rich, water-rich habitat available to it, and almost nobody is watching. Trail cameras changed this. In the last 10 years, millions of British households have pointed a motion-triggered camera at their garden and discovered something they weren't expecting. The footage that comes back, fox cubs playing on the lawn at 2 a.m., hedgehogs navigating flower beds with quiet purpose, a tawny owl dropping silently onto a fence post, has genuinely surprised people who thought they knew their gardens. What it shows, consistently, is that the garden you think you have and the garden that actually exists after dark are two very different places. Here's what's really out there. The first visitor most people don't know they have is the hedgehog. A hedgehog's night begins at dusk. It unrolls from wherever it's been sleeping, under a log pile, in a compost heap, beneath the dense low branches of a shrub. And it starts moving, and it doesn't stop for hours. In a single night, a hedgehog can cover between 1 and 2 miles, through gardens, under fences, across roads, through gaps in walls. It follows a route. Not randomly, a genuine memorized circuit through its home range, hitting the same spots in roughly the same order, night after night. If a hedgehog visits your garden, it is almost certainly part of that circuit. Your garden is a waypoint in a journey that may take it through a dozen other gardens before dawn. Here's what it's looking for: beetles, earthworms, caterpillars, slugs. A hedgehog will eat somewhere between 30 and 50 grams of invertebrates on a good night, roughly the weight of a small chocolate bar. It finds them by smell, pressing its nose close to the soil, snuffling through leaf litter and grass roots. That sound, a low, persistent snuffle, is often the first sign that a hedgehog is in the garden. People hear it and assume it's something larger. It's one of the loudest foragers relative to its body size in the British countryside. The numbers in Britain tell a difficult story. In the 1950s, there were an estimated 30 million hedgehogs in this country. Today, the figure is somewhere between 800,000 and 1.5 million. Nobody knows exactly. They're hard to count. What the surveys do show is that the decline has been steep, consistent, and is continuing. Your garden may be one of the most important places in its world, not because of anything dramatic, just because it has insects, and cover, and a gap in the fence it can't fit through. And the gap in the fence matters more than most people realize. But we'll come back to that. The second visitor is one almost every British garden receives, whether the owner knows it or not. The urban fox. Britain has around 150,000 urban foxes, a population that has grown steadily since the 1930s, when foxes first began colonizing towns and cities in significant numbers. They are now one of the most studied urban mammals in the world, largely because of long-running research programs in Bristol and London that have tracked individual foxes across generations. What that research shows is that urban foxes are not wanderers, they are residents. A fox has a home range, typically between 25 and 40 hectares in an urban area, which might translate to 2 or 3 streets in every direction from a central point. Within that range, it knows everything. Every garden that leaves food out, every cat that will challenge it, and every cat that won't, every gap under a fence, every shed with a space beneath it large enough to shelter. It patrols this range on a schedule. Not every garden every night, but a rotation, returning to the same spots at roughly the same intervals, checking what's changed, what's appeared, what's worth investigating. If a fox visits your garden, it has made a calculation. Your garden scored highly enough in its mental map for food, for safety, for shelter, to be worth the visit. That's not random. That's assessment. The research from Bristol's long-running fox study found something that surprised even the scientists involved. Urban foxes didn't just learn individual gardens, they learned individual people. Foxes, in areas where residents regularly put food out, developed what the researchers described as a tolerance threshold specific to that person. They would approach closer, stay longer, show less flight response than they would with any other human. The person had become a known quantity, a safe one, which raises the question of what else is out there, watching, assessing, learning. Everything we've covered so far, the hedgehog circuit, the fox's assessment, is visible. If you had a trail camera, you would see it. But there's a layer of activity happening in your garden every night that a camera wouldn't capture at all. It happens above the lawn, in the air, and most people have no idea it's there. Britain has 18 species of bat. Every single one of them is nocturnal. And on a warm summer night, most British gardens will have at least one species hunting through them, often within a few feet of the ground, sometimes lower. The most common garden bat in Britain is the common pipistrelle. It weighs 3 grams. That's less than a 2-pence piece. Its wingspan is about 22 centimeters, roughly the width of an A4 sheet of paper. And in a single night it will eat between 3,000 and 3,500 insects. 3,000 insects in one night from one bat. Think about what that means for your garden. Every pipistrelle hunting over your lawn is removing thousands of mosquitoes, midges and gnats from your airspace before dawn. You never see it happen. You almost certainly never see the bat. But the service it's providing, every night, free, in complete silence as far as you're concerned, is extraordinary. They navigate by echolocation, producing calls at frequencies between 45 and 55 kilohertz, well above the range of human hearing, which tops out at around 20 kilohertz. The calls bounce back from objects and insects in the environment, painting a detailed acoustic picture of the space around them, accurate enough to detect a wire 1 millimeter thick in total darkness. If you have a bat detector, a cheap device that shifts echolocation calls down into audible range, and you stand in your garden on a warm June evening, the sound is extraordinary. A rapid, dry clicking that speeds up into a feeding buzz as a bat closes in on an insect. The whole hunt compressed into a second and a half. The reason bats are in your garden specifically comes down to 2 things: light and structure. Garden lights, particularly older bulb types, attract insects. Insects attract bats. A lit garden is, from a bat's perspective, a feeding ground someone has helpfully marked out. The second thing is linear features. Bats navigate and hunt along edges, hedgerows, fence lines, the border between a lawn and a flower bed. They follow these lines reliably, which is why bat detectors held along a hedge tend to register far more activity than detectors held in the middle of an open lawn. Your garden has more of these features than most bats encounter in genuinely wild habitat. In a strange way, the structure of a typical British garden, its edges and borders and planted boundaries, is almost ideally suited to bat foraging. They've been using it for longer than the garden has existed. Beyond the mammals, beyond the bats, there's one more layer of the night garden that almost nobody thinks about: moths. Britain has around 2,500 species of moth. The vast majority of them fly at night. And the diversity of moth species visiting a typical British garden on a summer night is, to anyone who's looked closely at it, genuinely startling. Moth traps, simple light sources with a collecting box beneath, are used by naturalists to survey moth populations, and the results from ordinary suburban gardens consistently produce dozens of species in a single night. Hawk moths with wingspans that rival small birds. Geometrid moths so delicately patterned they look designed rather than evolved. Species named for the plants their caterpillars feed on. The elephant hawk moth, the lime hawk moth, the poplar hawk moth, using your garden's trees and shrubs as a nursery for their young without you ever knowing. Moths are critical, not just as interesting objects in themselves, but as a food source that runs through the entire ecosystem of the night garden. Bats eat them. Hedgehogs eat their caterpillars. Garden birds feed them to their chicks during nesting season. A garden that supports a healthy moth population is a garden that supports everything above it in the food chain. And moth populations in Britain have declined by 45% in the last 50 years. The reasons are familiar: light pollution disrupting navigation and reproduction, pesticide use eliminating larval food plants, the tidying away of the rough edges and unmown patches that adult moths need for shelter and that caterpillars need to survive. Your garden is either part of that decline or part of the pushback against it. There isn't really a middle ground. So, the gap in the fence. It kept coming up in the hedgehog research, in the fox data, in the bat surveys. The single most consistent finding from wildlife garden studies across Britain is this: connectivity matters more than almost anything else. A hedgehog that can't get into your garden doesn't benefit from anything in it. A garden surrounded by solid fencing, panels flush to the ground with no gaps, is effectively an island. And islands, in ecology, support far less life than connected habitats. The solution is almost absurdly simple: a 13-centimetre gap at the base of a fence panel. That's it, roughly the size of a CD case, small enough that most people wouldn't notice it, large enough for a hedgehog to pass through. The People's Trust for Endangered Species has a scheme called Hedgehog Street, which asks neighbours to create these gaps in shared fences and log them on a map. Where it's been done, in streets and neighbourhoods across Britain, hedgehog activity on wildlife cameras has increased measurably within weeks. The gap connects your garden to the next one, and the next one connects to the one after that, and what was an island becomes part of a corridor, and a corridor becomes something a hedgehog can actually live in. Your garden is not separate from the landscape around it. It never was. The fox doesn't see your fence as a boundary. It sees it as something to navigate. The hedgehog doesn't see your lawn as your lawn. It sees it as part of its route. What changes when you know this is the way you think about what you're maintaining. The gap in the fence, the log pile in the corner, the patch of lawn you haven't quite got round to mowing, the light you leave off. None of these things feel like wildlife management. They feel like not doing something, like leaving things slightly less tidy than you might otherwise. But at 3 a.m. tonight, when something moves through your garden in the dark, those small choices are the reason it's there. If you've never pointed a trail camera at your garden overnight, it's worth doing once. Whatever comes back, and something will come back, you'll look at your garden differently the next morning. Not bigger, just fuller than you knew. There's a video coming soon about the robin in your garden, why it follows you when you dig, why it sings in the dark, and what it actually knows about you. That one might change how you look at a bird you've probably stopped really seeing. If something moved through your garden last night that you've caught on camera, share it in the comments. The community that's building here is full of people watching the same dark gardens and finding the same unexpected things. We'll see you in the next one.